So in this video, we're going to kind of do the opposite of what we've been doing. Originally we've been given an equation of a sinusoidal function and we've been asked to graph it. Now we're going to be given the graph of some sinusoidal function, and so maybe that graph is of the form y equals, a sine omega x plus b, or y equals a cosine omega x plus b, all right? And we're asked to find the equation. So in order to do this, there's two things we need. We need the amplitude and we need the period. So how do we find the amplitude? Well, we just look at the peaks, troughs. Where is it peaking out? Where is it troughing? Where's the valley? And so it looks like the peaks and the troughs here are at 3 and -3. So that tells me I have an amplitude equal to 3, okay? Now, the period, how long does it take for us to go through a whole cycle? Looks like to get back to the same, it's going to take us a unit of 1. So the period from 0 to 1, so the whole period, right, at t is equal to 2 pi over omega. So this period is 1, okay? So how do I solve for omega? Well, I take 1 equals 2 pi over omega and solve for omega. So multiply both sides by omega, and I get omega equals 2 pi. So omega here is 2 pi. Now all I've got to do is I got to figure out, are we dealing with a sine or are we dealing with cosine? Okay? So how do we know what we're doing here? Well, if I start up here at the peak, okay, when cosine is 0, that gets me 1. So I think that's what I'm going to be dealing with, okay? So this is y equals, all right, amplitude. So it's a cosine omega x plus b. So this is what? This is an amplitude of 3 cosine. Omega is 2 pi x. And then did I shift my graph up or down? Is this graph shifted up or down? No, I don't think so. We're good to go on that front. So this is 0. So what is my answer? Y equals 3 cosine 2 pi x. That's the equation from that graph here. Let's do another one. All right, this one, okay, looks like I'm starting at 0 here. So that's going to be a y equals a sine omega x. Okay, so I know it's going to be sine because when I plug in sine of 0, I get 0. Okay. Now amplitude. Okay, so let's look at the peaks and the valleys. What are we doing? We're going up to 4, down to -4, up to 4, down to -4, right? So what's that tell me? That tells me that the amplitude is absolute value of 4, which is 4. What about the period? How long does it take for us to cycle through to get back to where we started? Oh, right there. How long is the period for this one? It is 4 pi. So if I have t equals 2 pi over omega, my period length, t, is 4 pi. So 4 pi equals 2 pi over omega. Multiply, do the reciprocal, I get omega equals, solve for w, 2 pi over 4 pi, which is what? That is 1 over 2, so 1/2, right? So that gives me an omega of 1/2. So what does this become? Well, do I have some shifting up and down? I'm not shifting up and down, so I'm good to go. So my b here is 0. This is going to become y equals 4 sine of 1/2 x. Okay, 1/2 x. Now this last one here, okay, this one looks a little bit different. What's different about this? Well, it looked like, half the graph was above the x-axis and half the graph was below the x-axis for the first two. But for this one, everything is above. So, if I kind of have this little shift thing going on here, if I split the difference, it looks like my whole axis got shifted up a unit of 1, okay? So I know, like, I'm going to have sine or cosine. Well, what's going on here? If I'm starting above that shift, it looks like it's going to be a cosine, right? So this is going to be of the form a cosine omega x plus b, where I know I'm already shifting this graph up, okay? So I know it's going to be shifted up 1, so this is going to be like a cosine omega x plus 1. I know that right off the bat. Now, if I'm going up 1, the amplitude, all right, how far did I go from peak to trough? Well, if we think about it, that whole distance traveled is 2 minus 0, which is 2. But the amplitude is how far, from that centerpiece up. Okay, so I take that whole distance and I divide by 2. So 2 divided by 2 gives me an amplitude of 1. So my amplitude is 1 here. Okay, so my amplitude's 1. So I have 1 cosine omega x plus 1. Now, how long does it take me to cycle through? To go from the whole cycle, looks like it's going to take 8. Oh my goodness. So t equals 2 pi over omega, but the t here is 8. So what does that tell me? If I solve, multiply through, I get w times 8 equals 2 pi. Divide by 8, I get w equals pi over 4. So my final answer is y equals the cosine of pi over 4x. But then I also have plus 1 to shift it upwards. Okay? So that pretty much covers all the different graphs that you might run into, and then finding the equation. Really all it amounts to is see where it starts. Does it start at 0? If it starts at 0, then I'm dealing with a sign. Does it start at some number? Then maybe I'm dealing with cosine. You think about it. If it's starting like halfway between the incline and the decline, then that's the sine. But if it's starting at like a peak or a valley, then that would be like the cosine. Okay, so if you're really looking at it, to determine between a sine versus a cosine, the sine will start somewhere in the middle, and then the cosine will start at either a peak or a valley. Okay, so that kind of tells you either sine or cosine. To get the A, you look at how high the peaks and the valleys are to get the amplitude. Like for this one here, it looked like it went from 3 down to -3. Well, that's a distance of 6, right? Well, if I take that distance and I divide by 2, I get that amplitude 3. Okay? Same thing here. That distance between 4 and -4 was 8. And I take that 8, I divide by 2, and I get my amplitude of 4. Okay? So it's the same things going on. To get your omega, literally you just look and you see how long your cycle is, and you use your formula to solve for W. Okay? And then, if it's shifted up or down, then you either plus or minus. If it's down, then you're going to subtract. All right. Good luck.